For this Brown Park presentation, I'm going to do it on the year 1898. There were a lot of killings, and happened in the year 1898. I actually call it the bloodiest year in Browns Park. My name is Charlie Wardle. I'm an author of two books of Browns Park Haunted History, and John Jarvie. I have also been studying about Browns Park for many years. Killings, lynchings, and much more happened during the year 1898 in Browns Park. 1898 was not a good year for many people in Browns Park. Willie Stang was shot and killed. Dave Lanton Harry Tracy escaped from prison 3 times. Valentine Hoy was shot and killed. John Bent was lynched, the only hanging we had in Browns Park. Ray Black was shot and killed accidentally. Jim Marshall drinks himself to death, and Bill Pigeon was shot and killed. Valentine Hoy had warrants issued for Pat Johnson and John Bennett. They had stolen livestock from the Hoys. Sheriff Nyman and Deputy Sheriff Farnham came to Browns Park to serve the warrants. They came from Craig, Colorado. Dave Ladd and Harry Tracy escaped from Utah State Prison in October of 1897 and headed for Browns Park and the Powder Springs hideout. Murphy family. Sarah Diego and John Murphy were married May 5th, 1875 in New Zealand. They had 3 children, 3 kids. Katie Alice, 1875, John James, 1877, and William Henry Leonard, 1879. William went by the name Willie. Sarah joined the LDS Church. John did not. Sarah and the children came to Salt Lake City and left John in New Zealand. Auburn Stang married Sarah Murphy, 1883, in Salt Lake City, Utah. Auburn adopted Sarah's 3 children. Pat Johnson. In the 1900 census lists Pat Johnson as being born on March of 1873 in Australia. Pat and his parents came to America that same year in 1873. Pat prison record says that he is from Iowa and his dad lived in Boone, Iowa. Pat and John Bennett came to Browns Park about the same time after the year 1892. I have a couple pictures of Pat here, prison pictures of him when he was in the prison. John Bennett. John prison record says that he was from Missouri. John Bennett served time in the Joliet, Illinois for attempted murder when he shot Charles Fellows in the back. John served time in prison from December 28, 1887 to April 26, 1892. Now, it is said that one time fellow outlaws had a mock trial for a person that died that died in the bar there. John served as a judge for the court. After the court session, he was given the nickname of Judge Jake, but I have not found any proof of that, just it's all hearsay. But John Jarvie paid John Bennett to build the stone house at his ranch. The stone house is still standing today, and also that I had not found any proof of that either, but it's just was said there at the Jarvie Ranch that John Bennett built that. Now I have a couple newspaper here, one from Fremont Clipper, January 21st, 1888. It talks about John being held in prison for the attempt to trying to kill somebody. The other one from Piatt Valley, there, July 26, 1888, it talks about John being given 5-year sentence for attempt to kill somebody, and he went to Juliet to prison, and the court was held in Lander. And the bottom thing there is John's prison card, probably from Lander, Wyoming prison. Willie Stang, shot and killed, was shot actually on February 18th, 1898. Auburn Stang, Willie's stepfather, would come to Browns Park from Vernal, Utah, to do some mining prospecting. At times, he would bring his adopted sons, John and Willie, with him to work at the ranches in Browns Park. In February of 1898, Auburn needed to travel back to Vernal, and Willie did not want to go. Auburn made arrangements for Willie to work at the John Jarvie Ranch, helping with the ferry. Now, his brother could also have stayed with Willie too at the ferry, but Willie's doing well, helping with the ferry until Pat Johnson came by. Now, John Bent and Charlie Teeter also could have been with Pat. They talked Willie into going over to the Red Creek Ranch with them. Find that interesting. They're going to the Red Creek Ranch, which owned by Valentine Hoy, who had warrants out for them. At Red Creek Ranch, they had an all-night party. In the morning, Willie went to take care of the horses. On his way out the door, he kicked or pulled the chair out from under Pat and ran out the door. Pat took out his gun and started firing towards Willie as he was headed to the barn. He arrived at the footbridge going over Red Creek. Willie was hit in the back. Willie ended up dying from the gunshot the next day. He is buried at Red Creek Ranch. Pat Johnson and John Bennett left Red Creek Ranch on stolen horses. One of the horses was Willie's. Now I have a picture here of the bunkhouse at Red Creek Ranch. That picture comes from where the Old West Stayed Young book. The bunkhouse is no longer still there. It has been torn down. This is a letter that Valentine Hoy wrote on February 20th, 1898, 2 days after Willie was shot. He's writing to Vernal asking for help to catch the killers. In the letter, he calls Pat Johnson a cold-blooded murderer. And at the end of the letter, he puts a P.S. This John Bennett is wanted. He stole the boy's horse after they killed him. So John Bennett took off when he took off on Willie's horse. Now I have a picture of Willie Stang. This picture comes from the book Where the Old West Stayed Young. Then Vernal Express newspaper article on February 24th, 1898 talks about the murder of Willie. It says Johnson was about to sit down to the breakfast table. The young Stang stepped up behind him and pulled the chair from under him for a joke, hurting Johnson a little as he fell, his hip striking the chair. Stang went out the door to do his chores, and Johnson made the remark, "I'm going to fix that Mormon son of a bitch," and walked to the door and commenced to shoot at Stang. Stang was struck in the back, okay, and he killing him. Now the next picture is actually Willie Stang's grave on the hillside at Red Creek Ranch. It does not have a marker at it, but that is his grave there. Harry Trace and Dave Lant. Dave Lant was born in Payson in September 14th, 1874. That's actually Payson, Utah. Dave Lant was sentenced to Utah State Prison for 8 years for being a thief. He entered the prison on September 8th, 1879. Now, Harry Tracy was sentenced to 1 year in prison for breaking into a house. He entered the prison in July 11th, 1879. On October 8th, 1879, Dave and Harry escaped from the Utah State Prison. Dave and Trace made their way towards Powder Springs and the Brown Park area. There's a picture of Dave and a picture of Harry there. Valentine Hoy. Valentine Shade Hoy was born on July 25th, 1848. in Pennsylvania to Henry and Mary Smith Hoy. Valentine married Julia E. Blair, December 27, 1883, in Fremont, Nebraska. They had 4 children. The first 2 died as babies in Fremont, Nebraska. Their third child, Neva Louise Hoy, was born March 9, 1887, in Fremont, Nebraska. Valentine and Julia owned the Red Creek Ranch in the Three Corners area between Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado. In 1898, Julie went back to Fremont, where Valentine Hoy Jr. was born on February 6, 1898. Valentine stayed in Browns Park, trying to put a stop to the rustling that was going on of their cattle. There's a picture of Julia and Valentine Hoy. The posse chasing the outlaws. When Pat Johnson and John Bennett ran from Red Creek Ranch, they went east and headed for Powder Springs. At Powder Springs, they met up with Harry Trace and Dave Lant. Now, Powder Springs is by Baggs, Wyoming, right on the Wyoming-Colorado border. John Bennett was sent to Rock Springs for supplies. The other 3 outlaws came back into Browns Park. Now, in Browns Park, a posse was formed to find Pat and John. The posse consisted of Sheriff Nyman, Deputy Sheriff Ethan Farnham from Craig, Colorado, Sheriff John Pope from Vernal, Utah, and Sheriff Davenport from Wyoming. Citizens from Browns Park also joined the posse. One was Jim McKnight, that's Josie Bassett's first husband, William Pigeon, Longhorn Thompson, Ed Bassett, Boyd Vaughn, John Stang, Willie's older brother, and Valentine Hoy. And there could have been some other ones too. The posse located the camp at the base of Douglas Mountain in Browns Park. When the posse arrived at the camp, they found it to be abandoned. The outlaws went higher on the mountain. The posse took all the outlaws' possessions that they have left there at the camp, including their horses. There's a couple pictures of Sheriff Charles Nyman, Deputy Sheriff Ethan Farnham, and John T. Pope. Valentine Hoy shot and killed March 1st, 1898. The next day after the outlaws spent a cold night on the mountain, the posse went back to the outlaw campsite to see if they were ready to give up. Sheriff Nyman led the posse to an empty campsite. Think the outlaws may have left the area. Valentine Hoy went around a large boulder just above the camp. One of the outlaws fired 2 shots a few feet from Valentine, killing him instantly. A few more shots were exchanged between the outlaws and posse, but no one else was hit. Eventually, the posse retreated down the mountain, leaving Valentine Hoy's body where he was killed. Later, Valentine's body was taken to Fremont, Nebraska, where his wife and children were, to be buried next to his 2 infant children who had died in 1884 and 1885. Catching John Bennett. Ed Bassett and Josie Bassett's younger brother and Boyd Vaughn left the posse and were heading to the Bassett Ranch when they saw a rider come into Browns Park and fired a few signal shots in the air. Ed recognized the man as John Bennett. Ed approached John Bennett and invited him to the Bassett Ranch. Boyd Vaughn went back to the posse to tell them that John Bennett was headed to the Bassett Ranch. Josie said that she was at the Bassett house baking cookies. When John Bennett came into the house, he took off his guns at the door and sat down to eat some cookies. Sheriff Nyman came into the house and arrested Bennett. Josie said that as they transported John Bennett to the Lower Post Office behind the Bassett house, he had the foulest mouth she ever heard. Bennett was threatening everyone in the area for his arrest. The top picture is a picture of the Bassett house. And the bottom picture is actually the picture of the Doors post office that was behind the Bassett house. Lynching John Bennett. The next day, the posse went back to try to find the other outlaws. Deputy Sheriff Farham was left to guard John Bennett. Several masked men came to the Bassett Ranch and took John Bennett away from Farham. They took John out the Bassett gate post. They tied his hands and legs, then lifted him in the back of the Bassett buggy. A rope was placed around his neck, and the buggy was pulled out from under his feet. There was no drop, so John's body just shook back and forth until he choked to death. After John was dead, the masked man left. Deputy Sheriff Farnham took John's body down from the gate post and buried him up the canyon behind the Bassett Ridge. The top picture is of the picture of the buggy they used to hang John Bennett. Next picture down is actually his grave up above the Bassett Ranch. Then we have a picture of the gate post. The gate post now is actually located at the Jarvie Ranch in the stone house that John Bennett built. Then there's a picture of the Bassett buggy in a parade with a boy behind it acting like he's being hung. Catching Pat Johnson, Dave Land, and Harry Tracy. On March 4th, 1898, the posse spotted the three men in the Powder Springs area on the Wyoming-Colorado border. Since the posse members were Officer Nyman from Colorado and Sheriff Davenport from Wyoming, they could go on both sides of the border. Pat Johnson gave up right away. Dave Lance started to give himself up, but Harry Trace threatened him. After a standoff between the two outlaws, they eventually gave themselves up. I have a picture of the Powder Springs. That's the lower Powder Springs. There's actually two springs, the upper and the lower one. There's a couple miles between the two. Then I have a newspaper article here from Bernal Express, March 10th, 1898, saying the whole gang caught. John Bennett was captured and killed. And they point out that he was captured and killed for Willie Stang and Valentine Hoy's death, but John Bennett wasn't the one that did those killings. Trial at the Bassett Ranch. After catching the outlaws, they were brought to the Bass Ranch and held in the Lador post office. There was a lot of talk about lynching the outlaws for the deaths of Willie and Valentine. Sheriff Nyman put up more guards to protect the outlaws, telling everyone to let the courts process them. The court was held at the Bass Ranch. J.S. Hoy, Valentine Hoy's older brother, presided over it. It was determined that Pat Johnson was to be sent to Wyoming to stand trial for Willie Stang's death. Harry Trace and Dave Lant would be taken to Rock County seat, Rock County, the seat Han Peak, to stand trial for Valentine Hoy's murder. The prisoners made it out of Browns Park without being lynched. A picture of Amos Bassett standing in front of his cabin with Josie Bassett in the background. There, Amos was the father of all the Bassett children in Browns Park. Pat Johnson's trial in Green River, Wyoming. Pat Johnson's trial was held in Green River, Wyoming. He was found guilty of second-degree murder and was given a life sentence. Pat's lawyer appealed to the Wyoming Supreme Court, claiming that it was an accident. Willie's last words before he died were, "Pat didn't mean to shoot me." The Wyoming Supreme Court agreed with Pat's lawyer, saying that it was an accident. Pat was then taken to Colorado to stand trial for his part in the killing of Valentine Hoy. He was found guilty and sentenced to 10 to 15 years. Now, I have a newspaper article from the Wetland World, December 29th, 1899, that talked about his Pat Johnson's trial in Green River. Then I have a picture here of Pat Johnson and Charlie Teeter in prison in Green River. Charlie Teeter was also, at the Hoy Ranch when Willie Stain was killed, but Charlie Teeter was found innocent, had nothing to do with the killing. Pat Johnson tried to get his sentence reduced. In 1904, he appeared before the Board of Pardons to try to get his sentence reduced, saying that he had nothing to do with Valentine Hoy's killing and Willie Stain's killing was an accident. There's a newspaper article that talks about this from the Denver Post. August 6, 1904 talks about him trying to get his sentence reduced. Then there's a Hans Peak census of 1900 having Pat Johnson in prison. I don't know if his sentence was reduced or not because in 1909 he was still in prison. Pat Johnson's letter. On March 23rd, 1909, Pat Johnson wrote a letter to Thomas A. Ruckner asking for help to obtain a pardon. In the letter, Pat says that the killing of Willie Stain was an accident and that he was not the one that killed Valentine Hoy, but he was blamed for it because Harry Trace and Dave Lamb had escaped from prison. Pat Johnson also writes about his skills as a stoneworker. Maybe Pat Johnson helped John Bennett build the stone house at the John Jarvie Ranch. Harry Trace and Dave Lamb escaped from prison. On the evening of March 22nd, 12 days after the prisoners had arrived at Hans Peak, the prisoners were able to overpower Sheriff Nyman and escape from jail. They were captured the next day. Harry Trace and Dave Lant were sent to Aspen, Colorado to stand trial. They both were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. On June 22nd, Harry and Dave escaped from Aspen prison and will make their way out of Colorado. Harry Trace was later caught in Oregon and was sent to prison. He was able to escape from Oregon prison in 1902. Later, he was surrounded by a posse and was shot. Being wounded, instead of giving himself up and going back to prison, Harry took his own life by shooting himself. There's a picture of Hans Peak Jail um, at the museum there in Hans Peak. And also there's a picture of Harry Trace there after he shot himself in 1902. Digging up John Bennett's grave. When John Bennett was lynched, it took place at their grandfather's ranch in 1898. Crawford was 5 years old and Amos Chick was 3. They started wondering if the stories they have heard about John Bennett were true or not, if there was a real grave at the Bassett Ranch. As teenagers, curiosity got the best of them. They took a pick and a shovel to the supposed grave to see if someone was really buried there. Crawford said Chick dug down about 2 to 3 feet. I was swinging a pick when it hit some what seemed to be a hollow place. When I raised the pick, the skull on the point, believe me, we scampered that skull back in the hole and covered it up in a hurry. There's a picture of Crawford and Chick McKnight, Josie's Bassett's son, 2 sons, and a picture of John Bennett's grave. Ray Black's accidental shooting. Another killing occurred in the summer of 1898 at Red Creek Ranch.
After Valentine Hoy was killed, the Black family, who lived in Salt Lake City, Utah, and friends of Julia Hoy, sent their son Ray to help Julia at the ranch. One night, Ray and Carl Blair, Julie's brother, spent the night sleeping on a haystack. In the morning, Willie McGinnis came back from hunting, saw the boys up on the haystack. Willie decided to show off his shooting skills by throwing cow chips in the air and shooting them. Ray and Carl sat up to watch Willie shoot. When a stray bullet hit Ray, the bullet went through Ray's shoulder and neck. They loaded Ray in the back of a wagon to head to the doctor in Rock Springs. The wagon ride was too bumpy for Ray. They returned to Ray Creek Ranch. Ray died July 22nd, 1898, in the arms of Julia Hoy. Jim Marshall drinks himself to death. Jim Marshall had a ranch outside of Circleville, Utah. Butch Cassidy and his mom, Ann Parker, worked for Jim. Because of cattle rustlers, Jim left his family and came to Browns Park to avoid the law. Jim may have been the one that told Butch Cassidy about Browns Park, or he may have even brought Butch Cassidy to Browns Park. A draw in Browns Park is named after Jim Marshall. It's called Marshall Draw. Jim lived in Browns Park from 1882 to 1898. He worked for Charlie Krause and often freighted for him. In the later months in 1898, Jim went to Rock Springs, Wyoming to bring back a supply for Charlie, including a supply of liquor. Before Jim left Rock Springs, he had a lot to drink and became drunk. On the trip back to Browns Park, Jim continued his drinking until he drunk himself to death. Jim's body was found in his wagon by Sage Creek. He is either buried somewhere in Browns Park or could have been buried at Sage Creek. Bill Pigeon's killing. Bill Pigeon was part of the posse that came upon Pat Johnson, Harry Tracy, and Dave Lance campsite on Douglas Mountain. In November of 1898, Bill Pigeon and Ed Bassett came to a sheep camp in the hills above Clay Basin. Bill did not want sheep in the area, feeling that was his grazing land. Bill started yelling at the sheep herder that they need to get their sheep out of the area or he was going to start killing sheep. Ike Lee was in the sheep wagon when Bill was telling them to get out. Ike told Bill that he has much right to be there as anyone else. Bill started threatening Ike. When Ike's dog came by, Bill kicked at the dog. Ike told Bill to leave his dog alone. Bill went for his gun. Ike also went for his gun, but was faster than Bill. Bill was shot dead. He was buried near where he was shot and killed. Bill Pigeon's headstone says that he died December of 1898, but the newspaper reported his killing November 20th of 1898. Now, the first picture there is the original grave marker for Bill Pigeon. It is now on display at the Jarvie Ranch in the Stone House. Then a new grave marker was placed there for Bill Pigeon at his grave. And the newspaper article from Lemery Boomerang talks about the killing. They call him Thomas Pigeon in the article. Ike Lee did turn himself into authorities, and it was ruled as a self-defense. Pigeon soup. A few weeks after Bill Pigeon was killed, Charlie Teeter was riding his horse in the area. He noted a group of cowboys camping and cooking something. This was later in the evening. Charlie stopped by to inquire as to what they were cooking this late at night. One of the cowboys replied and stated that they were cooking soup. Charlie went over to the pot, and there in the pot was Bill Pigeon's head, with the flesh being boiled off it. Apparently, a doctor back east was offering money for a human skull, and these cowboys were going to send him Bill's pigeon skull. Restoring Bill Pigeon's grave. In 2023, Bill Pigeon's headstone was broken. We think a cow may have rubbed up against it, or someone tried to push it over. There was no bullet holes or hammer marks on the headstone. On Memorial Day, 2024, Mark Silver and myself went to Bill Pigeon's grave to try to fasten the two pieces of the broken headstone together. We pounded two metal rods behind the headstones and fastened the headstones together. But there still is a crack in the headstone where it was broken.
That brings the end of this presentation of Browns Park, 1898. If you enjoyed this presentation, I do have other presentations you can go through about Browns Park. I also have two books about Browns Park. One, John Jarvie, goes over John Jarvie's life and also has his entries from his journal. The other book is called Browns Park Haunted History, which goes over a lot of the killings that happened in Browns Park and strange death. You can purchase these books at Amazon.com or you can get them from me at charliewardle34@gmail.com. Thank you for going through this presentation.